publications are focusing on the very violent and deadly clashes going on. Let's take a look at Faktii Komentari. That's a mass circulation daily written in Cyrillic. And this was the leading article on their website when I looked just a second ago. It talks about how the European Parliament today may announce sanctions for the Ukrainian government. There is mention on the website of the clashes between protesters and the police, but it's not really their main focus. But if we turn to the Kiev Post, which is the opposition English language paper, well, online publication, you can see here that this is very much their leading story, those deadly protests with very impressive photos, a live feed, in fact, of minute by minute what's going on. Just a second ago, they were talking about how the standoff is continuing this morning.
What about outside Ukraine? Obviously, still getting a lot of attention, I would have thought.
That's right. It's on the front page of a lot of papers. Let's start by looking at the International New York Times, where you can see one photo that, as you will see later, is on the front page of other papers as well. Now, the International New York Times talks about how Kiev is spiraling into chaos, the bloodiest day of protests. And this photo is also on the front page of The Independent today, which talks about East versus West, the battle for Kiev. Several editorials are also focused on the situation in Ukraine today. The Wall Street Journal, for instance, talks about how Ukraine is getting ugly. It points out that rampaging mob yesterday actually played into Moscow's hands and helped tarnish the image of what has largely been a peaceful movement. It points out, according to this article, that these riots in Kiev illustrate what can happen when the West fails to get involved. So that's an interesting point of view. The Washington Post also looks at this in their editorial and points out that the government's ultimatum was actually quite foolish in their opinion, as was the violent assault by riot police. This article points out that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, is probably pleased because he's pushed the Ukrainian president, Yanukovych, into a position where he's not going to compromise with the opposition. But according to the Washington Post, the only thing that will work is a political solution to this crisis.
Let's move on to Venezuela now. Yesterday, several thousand pro- and anti-government supporters taking part in tense rival rallies in the capital, Caracas.
That's right. It's getting a lot of attention in the Venezuelan press. One thing that they're focusing on is one of the opposition leaders, Leopoldo López. Now, he has handed himself over to the National Guard after he took place in that protest. Now, he is wanted on charges of inciting violence during previous protests, and as you can read here in El Universal, a judge will rule on his fate today. Now, Últimas Noticias, so it's an opposition paper, is also focusing on this protest. It's very critical of the president, Nicolás Maduro's government, for its violent repression of these recent anti-government protests. And this article says that, in this political, economic, social crisis, what's really needed is dialogue.
And you found another paper focusing on relations between Venezuela and Cuba.
That's right. This is El Nacional, another opposition paper. It's talking about Cuba's invisible hand and the firm grip it holds on Venezuela. Now, this comes after recently there have been rumors, actually, that Cuban anti-riot police participated. Well, they took part in those. They were part of in those protests against the government, and they actually were helping the Venezuelan police crack down on these protests. So those are rumors that El Nacional points out have been unverified until yet. But this article points out it wouldn't be strange that the Castro brothers would be intervening directly into what's going on in Venezuela because their own survival depends on it. It's time to shout, "Cubanos, go home."
Okay, finally, I'm very much looking forward to seeing the pictures on this next story. A word on what was almost an Olympic sport.
That's right. This is a great story that caught my eye today in Slate. It's called ski joring, and I think we can get some footage rolling about just what this is. It's horse-drawn ski racing, and there you can check it out. This is modern-day ski joring in Montana.
Potentially vicious.
It does look pretty vicious. So you have all sorts of jumps and that. Well, a lot of people say it's just hanging on for dear life as that horse gallops its way around. But it's been around since the 19th century. It comes from Norway, actually. And 86 years ago, it almost became a full-fledged Olympic event. In fact, Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of modern-day Olympics, was a big fan of ski joring. And you see, they have to grab onto hoops. It's kind of this mix between all sorts of things, rodeo, jousting, and, of course, skiing and survival there.
Survival.
But at the time, they thought it was too boring, which I find quite surprising. So it didn't become an Olympic sport. But modern-day ski joyers hope that one day it just might.
I love that. The gold medal for hanging on for dear life from Flo Vilmano. Thanks very much, Flo, with the international papers. Coming up for you after the break, we'll hopefully be talking to our correspondent in Beirut following those bomb explosions we've been talking about. Also, we'll have the latest from Kiev. Plus, a household name here in France, the mayor of Paris, Bertrand Delanoë, stepping down. We're going to be looking at perhaps his biggest legacies, beaches on the banks of the Seine and Paris's bike and car rental services. That's in focus coming up.